All right, well, good evening and welcome. I'm Sam Santiago. I'm currently serving as the chairman of the Arts and Culture Advisory Commission for the city of Dallas. Let's just say that serving in this role over the past year has had its own unique challenges, moving all meetings online to the city's WebEx platform, which I think some days I'm still trying to figure out. So that alone has its own challenges. Grappling with the stresses of the pandemic on our arts and community from a number of different perspectives, including financially, creatively, and otherwise, and even beyond that. But through it all, the arts have inspired and sustained us. And this Arts Month in April is one of the most visible signs of our recovery. Each year, we gather as an arts community to discuss an important topic. This is why we're here tonight. And we've done this over the last few years. We've done it, as you may imagine, before in person, with literally hundreds of community members, community leaders have come out in droves to understand, contribute, and discuss, the direction of the arts and the arts and culture community in the city of Dallas. Coming out of 2020, what better topic than justice? That's what we've been promoting over the last few weeks as we've been promoting tonight's conversation. And we think that it definitely is the most appropriate topic for tonight. How do we think about a huge topic like this, and how can the arts be part of moving our communities forward? Well, that's what we will be discussing tonight. Thank you for joining us this evening. And we'll be taking questions. And in fact, we have great panelists and moderators. So we thank you once again for joining us this evening. We thank in advance our amazing panelists who will be sharing their time and brain power. And we'll let you take it over from here. I believe Jennifer Scripps, Director of Arts and Culture.
Thank you so much, Chairman Santiago. And yes, we are thrilled to be hosting the Creative Conversation this year, because last year, like so many things, we were unable to gather. I wanted to introduce the stellar panel. I believe their bios were rotating during the gathering period, but you can also find them at www.dallasartsmonth.com/creative conversation. But this group was so fun to assemble, the team that put it together, because there's so many ways to think about justice. Obviously, the criminal justice system, but economic justice, healthcare justice, which the challenges we've experienced this year have been obvious, environmental, housing. How do we create a more just and equitable city? So here tonight, first of all, is our district attorney, John Crusoe. After serving for more than 20 years as a felony district court judge, he became our district attorney in January 2019. As a state district judge, he earned a national reputation for his innovative work on drug courts, criminal justice reform, and evidence-based sentencing. After his retirement from the judiciary, Dallas County honored Judge Crusoe by renaming its drug treatment facility in honor of him. We are thrilled that you're here tonight.
Thank you.
From San Antonio and Trinity University, we are joined tonight by Dr. Christine Drennan, who is a professor of sociology and anthropology. What really caught our eye is her PhD in urban geography and her research on inner city neighborhoods of San Antonio and the threats of revitalization and gentrification on those communities. Sometimes the arts can be part of that. Her research was also instrumental in the city's adoption of equity-based budgeting in San Antonio, which is the first major city in the US to do this, although I'm also happy to report the city of Dallas is working in this direction. So thank you for being here tonight, Dr. Drennan. Next is Sydney Freeman, who is the Director of Real Estate Development with Designing Justice, Designing Spaces. And I will say, of all of our Google searches of this term, the organization Designing Justice and Designing Spaces really had us sit up in our chairs. And they are based in Oakland and have done some amazing work all over the country, but we're thrilled that Sydney is based in Dallas. She has more than 18 years of development and acquisition experience in the commercial, retail, and affordable multifamily and single family real estate market. She is also a dedicated board of directors member at Dallas Area Habitat for Humanity, where she's been a volunteer for 19 years. So thank you so much, Sydney. Corrine Rice is joining us tonight from Junior Players, a group that has been part of OAC's field of organizations for a long time. She has more than 5 years of experience working with junior players, using her background in theater and dance, and is now their program director. And she's here to talk about their programs that really empower youth voices through the arts. So Corrine, we're thrilled you're here tonight. Thank you. And then our final panelist, before we talk about our moderator, is Byron Sanders, who is the CEO of Big Thought. He is a committed advocate for education, economic development, and creating equitable communities throughout Dallas. He was previously the executive director of the Dallas Education Foundation as well. He serves our community on so many boards. We're so grateful. A few of them include Fort Oak Cliff, City Square, the Child Care Group, Dallas Symphony, and the Dallas Mavericks Advisory Council, to name just a few. And of course, Big Thought is a trusted partner and advocate in many of the programs that OAC works alongside them on. So thank you, Byron. And then the city is so lucky to have a director of communications, outreach, and marketing like Catherine Cuellar. And she previously was the CEO of the Dallas Arts District and has a long track record of developing leaders, strengthening communities, and growing businesses through strategic communications, social entrepreneurship, and stakeholder engagement. And now, of course, she's doing this for the city of Dallas, and she came on board in the midst of COVID and has done it despite all of the challenges that that would entail, obviously. She previously co-hosted a program for KERA called the Writers Studio. And then just before my time, actually served on the Arts and Culture Advisory Commission for the city of Dallas under 2 mayors. So I thank this panel. And I know that you all did not come to listen to me, so I'm going to turn it over to Catherine to start us out. And I encourage you to think of good questions that'll come up towards the end of the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Scripps. Thank you, Chairman Santiago. And let me add to their thanks, my thanks for this esteemed panel. Please tag your posts about this creative conversation with the hashtag Dallas Arts Month. And as mentioned, please post your questions in the chat. We will take Q&A at the end, including questions that we received with our audience members' registrations. So tonight our conversation focuses on art and justice. And we know that justice is both an art and a science. In light of current events, this topic could not be more timely. So by way of introduction, I will begin by asking our panelists to say quickly what drew you to your field of practice or creative discipline. And I will start with Corrine.
Thank you very much, Catherine. In a nutshell, I have always been involved in the arts. I did theater in school growing up. I'm still currently a professional actress around Dallas and Southeast area, but I actually got an internship with Junior Players during my last year of college. And I had never heard of Junior Players before growing up in the suburbs of Dallas. I wish I had after learning about them. And I honestly, I just fell in love with the organization and their mission and bringing arts to the youth, especially those that are historically marginalized and BIPOC youth in areas that are considered arts deserts. So, so truly what drew me to Junior Players was my internship. And then I just fell in love and never looked back.
Terrific. And speaking of local youth made good, Byron Sanders, what drew you from corporate America into the lucrative world of arts administration?
It's the big dollars, Catherine. That's why I came here. We make it rain. No, what brought me here was actually similar to Corrine. My mom had me in stuff all the time, right? And so I was always in something after school. We were never at home. One of the things, so I did a lot of track, I did a lot of football, did basketball, and also community theater. and it was amazing. And if anybody knows a lot in the Black tradition, you start off with Easter speeches and then it just kind of rolls up from there, right? But I came to love it, and it came to be a really critical part of who I was. Matter of fact, in my junior year, because I knew I wasn't getting a scholarship to play basketball anyway, I chose to do the spring musical instead of my basketball season, because they were doing Little Shop of Horrors. You got to go for broke, right? So I did Audrey 2. I was the voice of the plant. Anyway, bottom line is we really love the work that we do here at Big Thought. Young people need an opportunity to plug into the arts and to build their creative selves and discipline. We'll talk about it a little bit more, but I think too often we discount just how powerful imagination and creativity are in shaping the world as we know it. So not, butterflies and daffodils and unicorns, but imagination actually is an actual discipline that we have to flex. And the arts is one of the most important mediums for us to get that done. And so that's a big part of why I'm here, and really happy to be here with you guys here tonight.
Thank you, Byron. Sydney Freeman, you have taken a very creative approach to an oft overlooked or perhaps hidden in plain sight area of creative practice. Can you talk about what led you to it and how you're doing it for an Oakland firm from?
Well, actually, my history in the arts goes back to high school. I'm a graduate of the esteemed Booker T. Washington. I am a dancer. I have a bachelor's in dance. Yes, you go, how do you go from that to an architectural firm? Yes, it's always an interesting story that we don't have enough time for. But if you think about it, the world of architecture itself is art. It's design, it's art. And being in that world and creating a built structure is one thing, but to create a built structure that has equity and equality for a community, and doing it for an organization that has a mission for it. Not every architectural firm does it with a mission. So, it was a long, curving, winding road. I ended up with DJDS. I mean, I've built a little bit of everything you can imagine. But you get to the point where you want the built environment that you're in to have an impact. And I certainly think that we're doing that at DJDS.
Certainly. And speaking of Dr. Drennan, the built environment and your area of expertise, what led you to focus your scholarship on that?
So I am an urban geographer. So when I listen to the others, I think, what do I bring? I'm not sure, but I trust you as far as like putting this together. And so, in all honesty, where I also have age, right, over the others. So I'm not going to go back to the high school days like Byron did. But I can talk about my time in San Antonio, and actually that is what drove me to the work that I do now. When I came to San Antonio about 20 years ago, I had 2 little kids in tow. I was coming from the DC area, trying to buy a house, and I was seriously steered by the real estate industry and into different parts of town. It's like you can live here, but you can't live there. And if you live here, then your kids would have to go to school, private school over there. And no, you can't even drive over in that direction because you shouldn't even go there. And as an urban geographer, just to be like kind of like manipulated across an urban landscape was really fascinating, but also really, really troubling. So I spent the last 20 years researching the creation of the urban landscape, how it's a product of private property, how it's been manipulated and institutionalized such that, we've drawn boundaries on the landscape, and this dictates the opportunities that you have in life. So it really is, when you ask that question, like, how'd you get there? It was trying to get my kids in school about 20 years ago.
Thank you. And District Attorney Crusoe, we heard a bit about your bio, and we talked a little bit in preparation for this conversation about the theater of the courtroom, but I'm curious how the arts and creativity have both informed and led you to this point in your esteemed career.
Yeah, so when I was in law school, I had the opportunity to try a criminal case and a civil case, and I learned then early on, and of course, as I came to work for the district attorney's office in the trial section, I learned that communication, and there's an art to communicating. There's an art to the presentation order, how you put witnesses on, the questions you ask them, how you will focus on one thing as opposed to something else, or give primacy to some concept or concepts in the case. And so as I went through my career as a trial lawyer, obviously it was important to communicate and to do so effectively, which is, quite honestly, and I don't mean to demean my profession, but it's acting to a certain extent, and it's communication. And so as I went on in my career and became a judge, then we're talking about who am I communicating to? It's people who are in the criminal justice system. And I decided early on that I wanted to help more than hinder, and I wanted to find new ways to do things. So in order to do that, I had to be able to communicate with the people who were in front of me. I had to communicate with their grandmothers and grandfathers. I had to communicate with their moms and dads and their brothers and sisters, because families are a system. And there's a family system out there that all of us come from. And so I had to learn how to communicate with them. And so I actually took courses in different types of communication within criminal justice. And of course, learning about addiction, learning about mental health, learning how to communicate those concepts and ideas of healing to those sometimes same populations and sometimes different populations. So, you know, this has been creative to me in a sense, even today, as we try to reform a criminal justice system. Doing things the way you did in the past is not acceptable. In fact, we have to sit back and reimagine or imagine a better system and reimagine our roles in it, admit where we were complicit, but yet go forward on a new path. And so I think there's a lot of creativity in this life I've had. You know, we look at the law and we talk about precedent. That's always looking back to determine what you do. If you do that and that's all you do, you're not going to get very far. So I think that I've tried to be creative and tried to communicate in different ways to different people.
That's a beautiful segue to what I wanted to talk about next. And I'll start with Sydney Freeman, just talking about how your work now has informed your understanding of the current and potential relationship between art and justice.
I think for us, you know, we seem to fuse the two through public engagement. I think that's one thing that certainly separates us from a lot of other firms. There's an art to, as you know, DA Crusoe said, to communicating. It's about doing the deep dive, and it's about having an understanding of not just what the superficial community needs, but those in the community that you really don't want to talk to, that make you uncomfortable. It's about talking to them, because they're going to tell you things you don't want to hear. But it's taking those things you don't want to hear and you really applying them and using, we have really calculated methods of taking the data and interpreting it and really doing a multi-level and multidisciplinary engagement with a lot of different people in a lot of different spaces. Putting that together in a way that's cohesive to where everyone can understand it, and then being able to create a built environment based on that. You know, a lot of people just say, oh, well, I talked to the community, we had a community meeting. No. It should take you in community engagement months. We're talking months of deep diving and really hearing in the community. And that in itself is an art. It's about, I mean, we've created a whole system of how you put that together, how you present it, and how you incorporate it. And then once you incorporate it, obviously the design itself is art. You know, designing it's not just a building, it's a space. It's a space that can house not only a social impact use, but an art use, which impacts your society. So we've been able to take a string and literally connect all the pieces, put it together, and the end result is building not just a building, but a whole community.
Well, and that reminds me to just put a plug in for the Dallas Office of Arts and Culture's Space Fund, which has helped to connect creative professionals with available spaces for their practice, especially during the pandemic, when we're thinking about where we work, where we live, and how we travel between the two in different ways these last 13 months. So Corrine, building off of what Sydney was sharing, can you talk about your understanding of the current and potential relationship between art and justice based on your work with junior players?
Absolutely. You know what Dr. Drennan had said about urban landscape really dictating the opportunities that are available. That truly is part of what junior players really works to do, is infiltrate those areas, those arts deserts, those urban landscapes where these youth would otherwise not have the opportunity to express themselves. And then we bring in our programming, and Junior Players is a multidisciplinary arts organization. So it could be anything. It could be theater, it could be dance, it could be broadcast journalism. But by bringing in our programming, we're really working to bring a voice to those who otherwise are silenced by the system, right? So they, because of where they grew up or where they are from or the color of their skin, you know, these historically marginalized and BIPOC youth especially are at a disadvantage in our communities. And so those are the students that we're really trying to bring these programs to, because, you know, it's not, at the end of the day, it's not about becoming an artist or, you know, choosing that as their career path per se, but they're really learning transferable skills that they're going to take with them into adulthood, and teaching these students that it doesn't matter that you grew up in that neighborhood, or it doesn't matter that your skin is that color. You have a voice. And by taking this class, this arts class, you know, you're learning these, you know, these social skills, these conflict resolution skills, these, you know, their confidence levels, you know, public speaking, like John was saying about, you know, it is an art of communication. And so allowing them to learn that through the arts, you know, and taking that into adulthood, these students, you know, these youth that are so often overlooked, they are the next change makers and the next policy makers of our communities. So we can't discredit them. And so by providing them these opportunities, you know, we are really working to empower those voices and teaching them that they can take that voice and they can use it and really create some real change.
Thank you. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I had an internet delay.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You were breaking out. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I thought you were done talking. I apologize for interrupting.
No, you're totally fine.
Justice Crusoe, since you obviously both work with justice impacted youth and also have seen the contours of our community change during the course of your professional life in Dallas, can you talk about the current and potential relationship between art, and I would expand that to say creativity? I would ask that of you, and then I'll ask of Dr. Drennan for the more global perspective.
Well, you know, really the creative community, as you all exist, especially Corrine and her career and others, when we talk about design, we talk about buildings, we talk about neighborhoods, when we talk about looking across the urban landscape, as Ms. Drennan has done, that's a different type of creativity. And what I've looked at is the change in our community and our definition of justice, and how we have taken stock of ourselves, I think. I think that all of these issues of poverty, race, education, health, socioeconomic status, et cetera, have always been there. but we didn't focus on them like we are today. And the metrics for being successful back when I started practicing law and today are entirely different. And in fact, I look back at how we practiced law then, and we really couldn't do so today. We are focused on underlying causes. In fact, I started doing that in the 1990s, and that's why I started with mental health and substance abuse. We look at the underlying causes of criminal behavior. And sometimes we can address it here, but sometimes it's larger. And sometimes it starts at the neighborhood level. It starts at birth. It starts with who raises you and how. It starts in your surroundings. It begins back in how your local community reacts to you. I think that policing today is coming under more and more scrutiny, not only because of the outrageous acts sometimes, but because of how police see their normal interaction with our communities, and especially communities of color. And I think that we're becoming more educated and holding them more accountable to their interactions, because that does have an impact on a child, an adolescent, and an adult, and it has an impact on who comes here to me and who we see. But understanding those things, we also are trying to heal. For example, let's take the issue of marijuana and who gets arrested. There's no question who gets arrested: people of color. In this community, Dallas, the city of Dallas, year in and year out, those misdemeanor arrests, over 90% people of color. Well, I can do something about that. Okay. I can't stop the police from arresting, but I don't have to charge the person. And so we don't have to let it go beyond where it went, and we can begin a healing process. And in fact, the more we've done that, and we've shown through metrics, okay, which are important today, as to time spent in jail versus working on violent crimes, versus the amount of money saved by my policy. We now have the Dallas Police Department has changed its policy. So we're going to have fewer people going to jail for that very low level beginning type offense, which is where it starts. And so what we've done is looked at how we live and how we're policed and how we interact with ourselves, our families, and the community, and made some decisions that have caused some others, that is the city of Dallas, to make some decisions. And we think that we'll have a much more positive relationship between the community and the police, and a much more healthy community when we don't have people that begin on that downward slide, that glide to criminality because of these first-time interactions. So we're hoping to improve that and improve the community.
Thank you. And Dr. Drennan, how has that, in your experience, led to a cycle of hopefully potentially increased justice?
So in all honesty, I have to reverse the question a little bit, because the question was, my understanding of the question is that how has my work informed my understanding of the relationship between art and justice? And as I sat with that and thought about it, I thought, you know, I'm coming from higher ed. And the better question for me is, how has art and social justice actually informed my work? So I had to reverse it in order to make sense of it. And I think a lot of it is because in higher education, so many things become an academic exercise. And we do things and we have these conversations, and we all feel very good about ourselves. But they rarely leave the walls of the institution and of the classroom. And the reminder, art and the connection of art and social justice, to me, is a reminder that this is not an academic exercise, that this is real and people live it. So in my own work, I work in the inner city neighborhoods in San Antonio, and we're behind you all as far as, you know, what's happening in the inner city. Some of our neighborhoods are under serious siege right now, and it's terrifying. Just the waves of gentrification and the displacement, and it's slow. I mean, I don't mean like the overnight eviction, which is horrendous, but almost like the slower form of displacement through property taxes and real estate values. And it's absolutely painful to watch. And we can read books, and I'm surrounded by books and articles, and we can model it and mathematically model it. But when I go into the neighborhoods, for example, on the west side of San Antonio, which is our some of our oldest and most humble neighborhoods, what they've done, and completely vulnerable to displacement right now. They've lined the streets with photographs of families from 2 and 3 generations ago. Old Mexican-American families from the time when they really were first coming, from the 20s and the 30s. So there was beautiful, like everyone's standing so still because the cameras took so long, and they made them huge. They made them poster size. And so when you drive into the West Side, you encounter families and faces upon faces and on faces. And so again, gentrification becomes not a book and not an academic article, but it is the displacement of these families whose faces are there because of the arts and because people are choosing to express this in different ways. So this is how I keep grounded, is that is not being carried away in my institution and all how clever we all are, but more by just trying to engage deeply in the city and watching when others are also, and it's often in the medium of art. It's in those photographs, or it's in a film that somebody made, or the art that the children make that's now in the library and at church. And it's the reminder that this is home, right? This is not, this is not just an investment. This is home. So sorry, but yeah, I reversed the question.
You wouldn't be a good professor if you didn't. Thank you. Karine, can you talk about how participation in the arts, especially among youth, is helping to impact their participation in our community and advancing social, economic, and political equity?
Yeah, absolutely. I heard this quote the other day, and I'm going to butcher it, but the idea was that there's this, people think that creativity is withheld for creatives or artists, right? And those are the creative people. But that's just not true. Creativity is across the board, as we see from the panelists here tonight, right? Creativity, it touches every person. And so I think that participation in the arts, especially at a young age with the youth, it doesn't just grow artists, it grows a whole person. And it helps participants gain these essential skills that they're going to take with them into adulthood. And these are real life skills that they can put into action. And so, the more confident that they become, the more capable they are to navigate the world around them and to actually enact policy change. And there's this great example. We have our transformation project as our dance residency program, and we go into middle schools and high schools, and we work with these dance classes to talk to them about what's going on with them in their lives, with their friends, in school, in their communities, at home with their families, what's going on. And so many of these students are children of immigrants or are immigrants themselves. They are struggling with the same things and sometimes more than we are as adults. But this one particular group of students, this was a few years back, and there was school shootings across the nation was blowing up the news, and they were talking about gun violence, and particularly shootings within high schools, and how they just didn't feel safe at their school because of the policies that were in place. There were multiple entrances to their schools, and they weren't being monitored properly. Anybody could just walk in from the back, and they didn't feel totally safe. And so when we were sitting there, having this conversation with them on day one, we're like, well, you can make a change here. Like, you have the ability. If you don't feel safe, we can take this to administration, we can have a conversation, and we can enact policy change. And they did. Administration listened to them. They held meetings with these students, and they enacted policy change, and they changed the way that people entered the building with checking IDs, signing in, things like that. So So it's a great example of how, you know, it's taking, even as, you know, they're not even old enough to vote yet, but they can enact real change within their communities. And so I really think that, you know, participation in the arts, it's really creating a whole person. And then as far as, you know, social, economic, and political inequities, those were really created as, you know, intentional systems that were made to work for those who created those systems, right? And so we can't achieve equity in the, you know, using the same tools or structures or strategies that they were built on. So I really think that we have to be intentional, and have these explicit actions to change behaviors and norms, and so much of that I truly believe happens with our youth. So by supporting organizations like Junior Players and our peers, you know, you're really supporting the youth of the North Texas area through the arts, and utilizing arts as the catalyst or the vehicle to real change. So yeah, I'll keep on talking, but I know we have more questions, so I'm going to end it there.
Yes. Well, thank you. And Dr. Drennan, your information, how have you seen good policy that can be upheld to remedy these unjust systems and advance justice, especially for artists been decimated by the pandemic?
Okay, so again, I have to take the question apart. I guess maybe, yeah, and you're right, I guess it's my job. So there's three things: there's good policy, there's systems, and then there's the arts, right? But good policy is only as good as the system that it's trying, because policy implements. So it's only as good as the system. And so we have to think about the system, and is the system just? And what Corinne said, it was exactly what I was thinking about as far as this question as well, is that our systems are not are not based on equity. And if anything, we claim that they're based on equality. They're not even that, but let's say that they're based on equality. And so we want to implement a system that's based on equality. But here's how that looked in San Antonio recently. So the arts were the first sector to get cut with the COVID emergencies back a year ago now. And they got cut because they're funded by the hotel occupancy tax. So our arts organizations that are funded were some of the very first to get to become the victims of the new budget. For the larger organizations that serve predominantly a very different demographic than the small organizations, with the large organizations, their funding is quite diversified, and they were just able to turn to another bucket, right? And to be able to cover the cut. But for our smaller arts organizations that are really embedded in the neighborhoods that we talked about, this cut was devastating, absolutely devastating. And so the implementation of policy really, and a policy of a bad system, exposed the system. Just like COVID has done it in so many ways, it has exposed our vulnerabilities. It did it here in terms of the arts and arts funding in San Antonio. So the fact that our small organizations were completely devastated by this, our larger organizations, which have endowments and have multiple memberships and have extremely wealthy boards, they're fine and they will be fine. And so we have to question, like, how do we, is the system of distribution and funding and delegate agencies, is it a good one? And is it a just one? And in our case, it is not, and a system based on equality versus equity really exposed some of the vulnerabilities that we've got built deeply into the system itself. So in San Antonio, we have not, honestly, in arts, and I'm talking specifically about arts funding. I think, we have a lot of thinking to do along the lines that Corinne just was advocating for us. So we need to undo that system, because it was created not to distribute equally, yes, equitably, no.
Thank you. Well, and Sydney Freeman, something you said earlier that caught my ear is about how your work has gone above and beyond the minimum notice requirements of most of our public meetings. And I'm curious to know how members of our audience, as well as just as a public servant, how your artful best practices for deep public engagement can provide a model helping other institutions make society more just and address these inequities.
I think for us, we took at DJDS, we took public engagement and visualized it and said, you know, we're going to integrate traditional and very familiar real estate development finance tools, but also, you know, morph that in with the building and the space design. So I think the best way to really describe it is one of our projects is with the City of Atlanta. It was the Atlanta City Detention Center. You know, if you think about any type of detention center, correctional facility, it's a structure, it's a building that houses and carries so much trauma. There's trauma for those who were incarcerated. There's trauma for those who work there. There's trauma for those who came to visit there. There was trauma for those who just simply passed by. But what we did is we said, okay, you know, we're going to create a space planning and a finance game because everybody seems to be okay with the game. The game makes everybody feel a little warm and fuzzy. So let's do a game with, you know, on a multi-stakeholder level. So we have everything from the mayor all the way down to, you know, the person that lives at the end of the street who sits on the porch and sees everything that happens, and get them together to have a moment of creativity. But most importantly, allow them an opportunity to be solutionary to decide the fate of this building. So it was about taking all those things, but the key word here was being solutionary, and using the data and the concepts that we've created in there. So it was important to have all the different stakeholders there because that was a way to make sure that other institutions can see what goes in and what's involved in creating this type of deep engagement. So it's not surface. I mean, you have to get down in the weeds. It's not comfortable, not by any means, but that's how you become solutionary.
Speaking of becoming solutionary, I wanted to ask Byron Sanders, because I've heard you speak eloquently before about some of the life choices that have led your clients into Big Thought's programmatic opportunities. And I wanted to talk about how Big Thought can artfully close the opportunity gap among clients that your organization is serving through different programs.
Yeah, you know, we talk about life choices. I think it's important to frame that. You know, one of the programs, and I think the program that Catherine is referring to is called Creative Solutions. We do that work with the Dallas County Juvenile Justice Department. Young people come to us on probation, and they're referred to us from the probation officers, and we work with them in a number of different ways, but our primary way is over 7 weeks, summer camp. Young people are coming to us, and there's 2 pathways. You do either the performing arts track or you do the visual arts track. And, you know, every person who comes to us has been incarcerated. You know, we've worked with everybody from 10 years old on up to 18, going into early 20s when they time out and then come back through as potentially peer mentors. We call them junior staffers. And we're one of the few programs that doesn't screen for offenses. So we will take young people who might have aggravated assaults. We'll take folks who might have had sexual offenses. We'll take the whole range. And we don't say, give us your artist. We say, come one, come all, right? We'll take everybody. And you talk about choices. Trauma is a word that's starting to be used more often, and I think that's good. The problem is, I think as that happens, the flip side of it happens where people start to not really understand what we're talking about here. trauma affects your actual brain, the physiology of your brain. There's a great book called Body Keeps the Score. There's a ton of research that's gone into the whole field of adverse childhood experiences. If you have 6 categories of these 10 study categories in this big landmark study about 97, 98, 6 of those will reduce your life expectancy by 20 years on average. The kids who come to us, on average, have had 14 distinct traumatic events happen over the course of their lives. So when you talk about, you know, how people come to a justice involved experience, you can't talk about that without talking about trauma. And one of the things that we then have to start to own is, what are the conditions that tilted a person toward making some of those choices? Too often we want to say, God, did you see what they did? Did you hear about that? We'll read what happened in the news, be like, if a kid ever, right? Like, you know, charge them. They have to be charged. We have to throw the book at them, right? But we don't take into account, what are the conditions that they came from? What is the world that we have shaped, that we are the owners of, that these young people have to contend with? And if we're going to have a justice system that does anything close to what we say it's supposed to do, I mean, we call them corrections facilities, right? If we're going to do anything there, then we need to embrace this notion of having trauma-informed spaces. We need to have trauma to healing practices. Creative Solutions, we have a trauma-informed program, I told you, that takes place over those 7 weeks. These young people come and they are creators. They are artists, and we pay them. They get a stipend. So they're getting paid. They're working through creative disciplines, and they're learning these workforce skills and trauma to healing skills. Beautiful program, one of the lowest recidivism rates in the state. Good program, get you a 40, 30% recidivism rate. Our 7-year average is 9%. Last year's 4%. And our artists are phenomenal. They're fantastic. But the thing that is the big takeaway out of all of that is that there was a brother who came through, he went through the Creative Solutions program. He's doing great now. He asked us, why did I have to go to jail before I got something that changed my life? So if we're talking about justice, we got to go further upstream. Programs like ours are needed, but they're needed because they're research and development. They're the lab that shows how society itself should be shaped. And art as a pathway and a roadway for the disciplines to allow a young person to be able to find, one, their own voice, recognize it was always there, and then learn how to use that and then reshape the world around them that turns it into something that allows them and their family and their community to thrive. That's what we need, but we got to swim further upstream and not wait for young people to be tilted toward making a decision that's not in their best interest or the best interest of their neighbors around them. And if we do that and try and come up with these solutions sans art and culture, we're going to miss the boat every time.
So District Attorney Crusoe, Texas has traditionally been a law and order state with the most people behind bars and the 6th highest percentage of our general population incarcerated. Generally speaking, what have you seen that works in swinging the pendulum the other direction? And what role do you see for arts and arts organizations in your work?
Well, I'll tell you what Byron said was beautiful. He hit the nail on the head in a lot of respects. And I think that when he talked about the things that are important to me to get us straight, is sometimes things are going to happen to people before they come into the criminal or the adult or juvenile justice system. And what he's doing is engaging in a process of healing. But he's doing it he's looking at the actual underlying circumstances, the psychosocial circumstances of the individuals, and he's putting a healing process on that. And so about 15, 16 years ago, we were told that even though we had 150,000 prison beds, we would need 17,000 more. And there was a bipartisan effort not to do that, to not build those 17,000. So the program that I had started back in 98 here in Dallas, 1998, the divert court program, and Byron's talked about recidivism rates, we had a 68% reduction in recidivism. And then we did a cost benefit analysis. You know, that's important in Texas, right? We don't want to spend any money on anybody. For every dollar spent, $9.34 in avoided criminal justice costs. So just this is a certain narrow pathway into the lives of people who come to the courthouses in Texas. The legislature decided to put more funding into treatment, well, assessments, treatment, inpatient, outpatient continuum of care. Now, there's just a narrow little alley into the broader criminal justice equation. And what we did was we've closed 10 prisons. So even though, yes, we have a terrible history amongst the states in the United States, we're starting to correct that. Then you have myself, you have the district attorney for Bexar County, speaking of San Antonio, Joe Gonzalez. You have Mark Gonzalez in Nueces County. You have Brian Middleton in Fort Bend County, Jose Garza in Travis County, and Kim Ogg in Harris County. And we're all taking a step back and say, okay, what is it about this system that in and of itself can cause problems? And we know from recent research from Boston, the Boston area, where they declined to prosecute low-level misdemeanor offenses for many, many years, they were able to go back and gather up enough people and do enough data and research to show that not prosecuting low-level misdemeanor offenses actually decreased recidivism. And so what we start with is this premise that people who do wrong must be dealt with in the criminal justice system, or else we have failed as a community and as a society. That's a false premise. Okay. And so those are the kinds of things that we're doing here. For example, we've gotten out of the business of criminalizing the poverty as much as we can. We're working on more aspects of that. Homelessness, mental illness. And of course, this thing of misdemeanor marijuana is just by the thousands of people in Dallas County. And that has changed across the landscape of Dallas County. It's changed across the landscape of the state of Texas by prosecutors like myself and others. So that's where we're hoping to go. We talk about trauma. The criminal justice system can inflict unneeded trauma, unnecessary trauma in and of itself at a youth or an adult level. And so we're trying to be responsible to that, trying to be responsive and trying to take ourselves out of that role, thereby allowing the community to either not be harmed or to heal.
In our final minutes, I'm going to take some of the questions that we received via Q&A, either from registrations in advance or in the chat. First question from Cynthia asks, what companies and institutions are doing to look at criminal justice with arts organizations and how?
I'll chime in real quick on that. So similar to Big Thought, as Byron mentioned, working with the criminal justice system, particularly in our youth, Junior Players does a similar program with youth in juvenile detention centers, particularly LETOT is one of our biggest partners, where we go in and we utilize the arts with these students to teach them life skills, like resume writing, job applications, interviewing for a job. I mean, the arts are integrated into all of that, right? You've got creative writing, you've got improv skills in theater, you've got, tons of different art forms that you can utilize in there. And so we come in with photography, theater, visual arts, a number of different art programs. And we utilize them with these life skills programs with these youth. But then we also have our Visions of Peace program that we use, that we're focusing on conflict resolution with these students. Because as we've mentioned multiple times, there's trauma there. And trauma can be, youth are going to act on that trauma in a number of ways. And the biggest way is acting out, right? They continue this cycle and communities see that as this negative, like they just keep acting out. And so teaching them through the arts, conflict resolution, and coming up with solutions that are, that are nonviolent solutions, right? and utilizing the arts with that. So, within the arts, you have to think of conflict resolution quite frequently in different arts programming. And so using the arts as a vehicle in a way that you can bring these different skills to the table for these youth to show them that, there are steps that we can take to conflict resolution. Byron, go ahead. I see you unmuting.
Yeah, no, I was, co-signing what you're talking about, Corinne. I'm also saying that we need our corporations to stand up and say something, quite frankly. And especially in a state like Texas, business rules the day, right? Both sides of the aisle. I think this is what people mean when they say become an anti-racist organization. It means you keep your same mission. You might sell widgets and gadgets, right? That's fine. But also you recognize that you're living in a space where there is some very clear disparate impact that's taking place on an entire population, Black and brown, poor. And if you go to rural white, right? Like that, you have to recognize that and understand that as a citizen, you have power. And as a corporate citizen, you have power, and with great power comes great responsibility. The last thing I'll say from an institutional standpoint is there is a thing that I hope we start doing. In the wake of George Floyd's murder and I think the groundswell of awareness that came around that, I think there's a real opportunity. One of the cries that came from the activists out on the streets and blocked to the boardroom, honestly, was, defund police. And people saw that and they're like, whoa, that's a little far afield. But if you're really listening, you understood what they were saying. We ask too much out of our policing system. We ask them to do things that they were never designed to do. They were never commissioned to do. And we ask them to fix mental health, youth services, all of the other failings that we as society have levied. And it doesn't make sense. Just even from a strategic standpoint, it doesn't make sense. And so if we know the things that we're talking about work, if we know the policies that Judge is putting into place work, if we know that the programs like Creative Solutions or what Junior Players is doing work, if we know all the things that we've been talking about on this panel work, those things require resources. And it doesn't make sense for us to say, let's fight crime by continuing to put resources in the policing side, as opposed to, like we said, swimming further upstream so you properly fund the arts, education, youth services, mental health supports, all those different things that those same dollars could be going toward. Those things affect public safety as well. And if I want to get to a world where I don't fear for my own life and my sons and my daughters, if they happen to be jogging at night or going to fill up their gas tank or trying to change a tire out on the middle of the road, if we want to get to a place where we are not feeling like we're living in a separate America where we don't have as many rights, then we start to look at our solutions very differently. And that means transferring and reallocating resources to these programs that address the trauma and the root causes of our disenfranchisement, as opposed to saying that we can punish our way into a better society. That's why I'm saying our institutions, cities, counties, we need to shift our focus and shift our priorities.
Well, thank you, Byron. And in closing, I'd like each of you in 30 seconds or less, given the creative professionals we know you have drawn into our audience tonight, what wishful call to action do each of you hope will inspire us as we depart? And Sydney Freeman, I'll start with you.
I would say lean into the restorative justice practices. Learn about them. Connect with your practitioners and the folks in your community who are engaged in this type of practice. Look to and learn from, I think, groups in the Metroplex, the region, the entire state who are already doing this work. Tap into the existing resources. And I think from that, you can break out of the silo and start to work across different sectors and multidisciplinary collaborations and seeing how, but the thing is you need structures to do those. And so that's where you come to the art world, particularly designers and architects who share that mission in order to build it.
Karine, you want to go next?
Sure. Gosh, just get involved with your arts community, because we are everywhere. So you don't have to look hard. And I mean, don't just attend that show. And I'm not saying donate your dollars, which please do donate your dollars. But if you don't have the capacity to do that, join that board or that advisory board, volunteer. Get involved. There's so many ways that you can get involved. And there's so many different types of arts organizations throughout our community, be it with the youth, like Junior Players and Big Thought, or, performance-based or visual arts. There's so many different ways, and we need the community engagement to keep pushing forward. So get involved, join that board, donate those dollars, go see that show, and then spread the word. Tell your friends and make them get involved too.
Thank you. District Attorney Crusoe.
Well, I think I have several thoughts. First of all, let's talk about leadership. And there's a difference, I think, when you lead as, and I'll put it in some simple terms, as a politician, it's more transactional, as opposed to a statesman or stateswoman, where it's more big picture. And I think that in today's world, and I think talking to everyone here, you can see that they have their own way of leading and own ideas of leadership. But in order to communicate that to everyone else, I think that when I think about a statesman, I think about a person who's selfless. I also think about a person, and I want to tie into what Byron has said, Karine and everybody else, is that we can't work in silos. And that's one of the things here that I think has made the difference with this district attorney's office today, is we don't work in silos. I need Byron to be successful. I need him to be successful so I can be successful. So I need to support him. I need Karine to be successful so I can be successful. So I need to support her. And then this other thing, just in closing, this idea of restorative justice, that's kind of what I was talking about, helping the substance abuse and mental health. But the other thing that Byron was talking about is a little different. It's called reformative justice. And that's reforming how we see and interpret and apply justice. And I think Byron is right. I don't know about defunding the police, but we can certainly rethink the police. And I think that's the point that Byron was making. You can spend the same amount of money. You just rethink the mission and see whether it's overdone or underdone or whatever, and come to a different conclusion. So I just leave everyone with those thoughts, and thank you all for inviting me to participate.
Thank you. Dr. Drennan.
Yeah, and thank you also for inviting me. And my wish for a call to action is that we need to own it, is that we're complicit. It continues. And so often, and and middle-class white person, right? And so I will speak for us, is that we want to point backwards. Everybody's horrified by things like redlining, and they get very self-righteous about it and tell one another, like, can you imagine? And would you please look at the language in this? Do you believe it? And then we write land acknowledgements, right? And we are so proud, and we embroider them and put them on the wall, and then we say where our land was. But it continues. The thing is, and then we go to the march and we take our picture at the march and we post it, and then we go for coffee, right? But we're complicit, and we need to own it. And we need to know that when we buy a house, we're continuing, we are the colonizers still, when we go into that neighborhood and say, well, I'm gonna fix up that old house. And and so it continues. And we always want to point backwards and say they were very bad. And thank God we don't talk like that, and we don't use that vocabulary anymore. And just let me buy that house and let me do as I please. And that's where my call is that we, it still happens. And now we're part of the problem. And someone will look back at us and go, yeah, they colonized the neighborhoods. And that's my appeal to my students. That's my appeal to my friends. It's not going so well, but thank you again.
Thank you. And Byron Sanders, last word is yours.
All right. I think we have to recognize that we're not going to only love ourselves to a more just world. It's going to take some really hard decisions. And it's going to take somebody is going to have to give power. Because if we're going to talk about an equity world, then somebody's got to give something up. But the thing is, it's a short-term decision. Because if you give something up, what you'll see is that by other people being empowered to live a more just, equitable, fulfilling, and verdant life, everything is better. We have to recognize the self-interest of giving something up. And I think one of the challenges that we oftentimes run into is everybody sees it as a zero-sum game. If I give something up today, if I embrace equity and say, we're going to send more funds to that part of town because they've been disinvested in for so long, instead of saying, oh, that's not equal, but saying, yes, that's the right decision. How will we have a much better Dallas in 50 years, right? Because here's the deal. What we've been doing ain't working. So we're gonna have to do something different. And one of the different things, many of the different things have been referred to here, but it's also recognizing that at some point it is actually going to be a personal decision that you're going to have to make. The NIMBYism that I think Dr. Drennan is pointing to, when we're talking about something over there and something that happened back then and over there, it's all fine and well. But when it comes to your personal decisions, your personal vote, your personal choice on where to go, live, play, shop, our personal decisions are going to have to change. So let's get at it.
Thank you so much. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thanks to our audience for bearing with us as we ran a little over time. Tonight's conversation will premiere live on YouTube and Facebook on Monday, May the 3rd. Please share with others who weren't able to attend using the hashtag Dallas Arts Month. And again, thanks to Chairman Santiago, Director Scripps, Barbara Bernier for pulling it all together, Rhonda Ivory behind the scenes, and others. Be well, be safe, and I look forward to being with you in person next Dallas Arts Month. Thank you.